Welcome to DejaVue.
It's your favorite Vue podcast. You just don't know it yet. Or maybe you do. I mean, well, we have quite some episodes on the list here. And it's another one with my lovely co-host, Michael here. Michael, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you, Alex?
Fine, can't complain. Of course, we're not alone again for our lovely episode here. We have a special guest. He is the founder and CTO of Directus. It's Rijk van Zanten. Rijk, how are you doing?
Hello, doing fine. Thank you.
Glad to hear that. So you joined us and we'll talk about a lot of things from migrations from Vue 2 to Vue 3, which is an interesting topic, especially when it comes to a huge code base that's used by, well, thousands of people out there. What you learned in there, what Directus is a little bit. But first of all, maybe tell us, how did you get into web development and Vue.js after all?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I got my start, funnily enough, as a user experience designer. So I really didn't even do any coding for the longest time. So I was in college, I did a user experience design, and I got into front-end development a little bit, mostly out of necessity, right? Which is like I wanted to build my own designs and execute and be able to make it testable and all that kind of thing. So I got into front-end development sort of halfway through college at that point, and realized that it was sort of weirdly easy and fun and that nobody else thought the same thing in that college. So that was kind of funny. And it was like, all right, maybe there's something here. So I kept doing it more and more and then got into it and eventually found myself in this sort of, designer developer type role over time. So I worked in agencies for a little bit as this sort of dual, know enough about design to just be able to take an idea and just execute it immediately, but also know enough about development to just be able to do this stuff. Yeah, and then did that more and more and more and more and more. And at a certain point, this was still in the sort of jQuery WordPress days, right? And then at a certain point, reactive frameworks became a thing. And then it was sort of like right there trying to figure out, okay, we've been building apps with what was it, nuxt.js or Backbone and tools like that. Oh yeah. For a little bit trying to make it work, but it was always just a bit, fighting the tools and feeling like you're just misusing the platform at that point. So when the first reactive frameworks came out, with React, of course, being one of the earlier ones then, that kind of got some traction, but it was kind of tricky to use. And because I came in from sort of a designer perspective first, and then doing web development, it was very much like an HTML, CSS cat, right? I didn't do a lot of JavaScript development because that was always just the extra on top of it. Like you would build the whole thing with HTML, CSS, just sprinkle on tiny little bit of JS to make it interactive, and then that's it. So trying to flip that upside down with something like React never quite fit. It never quite worked for me. So yeah, when Vue came around, especially with the Vue single file components, that was kind of the moment that it was like, oh, this is home turf, right? This is familiar. This is now we're dealing with HTML and CSS like I know and love, sprinkling a little bit of JS for the interactive bits. This is great. Love it.
That's interesting you mentioned that because I've thought before that React seems to appeal more to like the computer sciencey people who are like, they're going to learn Haskell and like go hard on like type systems and like crazy stuff, and they like to talk about monads and all of that, whereas Vue seems to appeal more to people who are like just want to get stuff done or who haven't had that same like computer science like super technical background. I don't know if that's true, but that's
I think there's
that's
something
the impression
there.
that I've got.
I think there is something there, honestly, and you see the same. I mean, industry-wide, you see, your traditional web developers turn more full stack and more backenders turn more full stack. So it's like, where do you find each other in the middle? But yeah, no, I've seen that same thing happen on my end as well. Yeah.
And I think also with a lot of people coming from actually the other side, not from a UX perspective or like UI UX design perspective, but from the back end, also there that just mentioned like, okay, getting a bit more into the front end part, not only, okay, here's a modal, let's make that open up, but then, more and more things are coming to the front end or came to the front end last years. And also someone who came from Laravel, from the PHP universe years ago, it was so interesting that then there are people reached out for Vue that were not like, I don't know, front end developers by profession at all, but they wanted to get things done and having a solution for progressive enhancement in the first place, which is where Vue came from. While other frameworks like React or Angular, they kind of forced you, well, React, you could also use it with a script tag, but no JSX, so that's a no. Mm-hmm. And Angular not really. So the only way besides jQuery, which was a bit meh, was Vue, so to say, right?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you gotta, it's funny that people started hating on jQuery over time, but I've completely 180 that I'm like, credit where credit's due, man.
Oh, I don't.
It was
jQuery
rough.
is a
It was rough
jQuery is
before, and then it was really good when it came out.
yes, and it's so important that jQuery actually was there. I mean, in the times where browsers implemented things differently, like the hell no, we don't like. It was great, but of course nowadays, like
times change.
jQuery,
Times change.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
For sure. Yeah, and now that the web, the web and the browser became, I mean, I almost want to go as far as to say it's now the primary application model, right? So it's like if a new startup comes along, including us, you're not building, a Windows app and a Mac OS Swift app first and foremost. You start with, a web app, you make it a progressive web app, and then maybe, you fly it into an Electron or Atari or something to turn it into a native wrapper. And even on iOS, like you don't see a lot of native apps anymore. So it's like the primary application model now became web development, which is interesting. That's wild if you think about it from just 10 years ago.
Yeah, it's interesting also how that shaped from, I don't know, so many people use Java. It's like, oh, Java runs on all the devices and we have all these Java applications. Well, of course, now spinning up everything, even without knowing necessarily backend skills, with all the services available, with all the headless CMSs out there, for example. Yeah, it's pretty easy to get started without knowing all these like skills super deep, which you needed before. And it's like, okay, I built my application. And not even getting started saying like, yeah, you just use something like bolt.new or VZ or whatever, just like here AI, go for it. But even without that, it got significantly easier.
Which is that a bit of a curse and a blessing? Is it's
just what I say, yes.
Yeah, because it's from Ramsden, and it's of course, like, for the record, I couldn't have started Directus for what it was if it wasn't for that, right? If the tooling wasn't available and I wasn't able to do enough JavaScript on the server side to get something going, like, it would have never existed. So it's definitely a blessing. But at the same time, I've made mistakes on the server side that a backender would look like, and just in the first second be like, well, don't do it like that, right? Just because I'm coming from a CSS is my hometown. Let's try to make a server thing work. Early days. That is also a bit risky sometimes, right?
100%. And I think that's a really good point to touch on. So it's like, okay, you basically had a lot of skills learned from the UI UX perspective, going to like programming, going to Vue.js in the front end. So how did it happen that you eventually landed on Directus? And maybe for everybody not knowing Directus yet, what is Directus?
What is it in the first place? Yeah, very good. So Directus is a source available project. It started way back in the day as a headless CMS first and foremost. So we were doing, a lot of agency work, and for that agency work, I had more and more sort of custom projects, let's call it. So instead of your standard website, it became around, museum inventory management or collection management, or it became what's another weird example, like a museum, like the museum is what I mentioned, the collection management, or you have more retail management, or we had like a job site management at some point. So you got all of these weird flavors of data management, right? So at the time, this is what, 2014, 15, 16, that window, there wasn't
like 10
really...
years ago-ish.
Oh God.
Sorry to make you feel old and everybody else. Yeah, 10 years ago.
Yeah, you're right.
Oops.
Don't tell me that 2015 is 10 years ago. Oh boy. So around this time, you didn't really have a lot of options to make stuff like that work. And as a developer at the time, I was like, okay, I just need a database with this stuff in it. But then at the same time, I need to hand over something to the person in charge of managing the collections to be able to manage that database. And you're not going to give somebody, a PHP my admin credentials or something and then, wish for the best. So that's kind of where, the Directus idea started to brew and become a thing. It's a funny backstory. I started noodling on something that later became sort of the current Directus code base by myself first. I was, searching online, doing some research, and I came across a thing that Ben, my co-founder, open sourced right around the same time that was like vision-wise very similar. Like I had a very similar idea around, okay, it's basically just a user-friendly layer to a database, but then you have a set of APIs so developers can also still use that in the same safe way. So you get the flexibility of a database without the sort of complexity that is usually associated with that. So Yeah, we met up and we started partnering up and then started working on it together. So it was really a very typical sort of open source, two different forks come together type of moment in that sense, two different
Sweet.
branches.
Open source wins again. Yay.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's. I think we can do a whole different session around, how do you grow a project sustainably in open source, but let's save that for a different day. So yeah, building that, it really started as a scratch your own itch type of thing. So when we started working on it more in depth and more seriously, when more people started using it, it was the question of like, okay, what is the right tool stack for this, right? So the very first iteration that been open sourced, I think it was Knockout.js together with like PHP with Slim or something on the back end, if I remember. This is a long time ago. I was working in Node.js because it was JavaScript and I was a front-end developer, is the only thing I could do. So there was a moment in time where it was like, all right, we know we need to do a sort of major upgrade because the system right now stands a bit old. The vision is really good, but let's figure out where do we go from here for the current sort of iteration. And we know like it is a fairly stateful, complicated app. There's just a lot of moving bits and pieces, and you have a lot of sidebar and toggles and collapsible bits and buttons that execute little scripts and all sorts of weird things. So I was like, what is the right tool for the job? And React was honestly sort of the obvious first choice at that point in time. It was the one that people sort of knew about and it had the biggest sort of existing libraries and all that kind of stuff. Because this is, again, we're talking 2016 or so. This is relatively early days, right? But one important requirement for me was, well, I want to make sure that front-end developers can do front-end development efficiently. But also B, because it was going to be an open source project, and it still is, I found it very important that it was easy to contribute to. And I think that was really the main reason for me to go with Vue was like, I felt like that was the easiest to learn if you've never used it before. And I think that's still true even to this day, because even though React, it's still the powerhouse that it is, and it's one of those, vicious cycles of, companies ask for it, boot camps teach it, therefore every new developer learns it first, therefore companies hire it circle. But I think it's still true because in a React code base, because it's just, at least at the start, I haven't used it in a minute, arguably, but at the start, it was very unopinionated, but that also meant that every single React code base was just totally different. Like there
I
was
think that's
some
to a big part still the case. Like,
I think that's true. Yeah.
I was talking to a lot of people of like, oh yeah, reviewing especially applications and like, yeah, with a framework, like, if you use, I don't know, framework XYZ, then you can look into 10 different applications and you feel at home. And then someone's saying, yeah, for Vue, for Angular, for Svelte, sure. But for React, it's a bit different there.
Right. So I that has been the case since day one, but it is kind of funny because that means that whatever opinions that I put in place or whatever code style or rules or something, that is another new thing for people to learn on top of React itself. Whereas with Vue, single file components rather, you had a fairly well-defined, this is what it is, and you do it this way and no other way, full stop, right? For better or worse. There's some parts, especially, in the Vue 2, back in the object days, or the object components, what would they call it again?
Options API, I mean.
Yeah, options API. That's the one. Yeah. Exactly. There were some rougher edges around that structure sometimes where it just got a bit like, oh, my computers are down here, but then the methods are up here. Now does all that come together, which has since been solved, luckily. But at least that structure did mean that for somebody coming in, especially if you want to contribute, oh, there's a little CSS glitch, you can just dive in and find it and just do it, even though you've never used Vue before. And I think that was huge for an open source project.
I think one of the benefits or the appeals of React is actually that it is unopinionated in that way.
Sure.
And that you can look at, oh, there are 10 different state management libraries. I get to pick and choose exactly which one I want to use. It can be fun for the developer in the short term, but then in the long term, it can get pretty tricky because no one knows what's going on. And you do some weird stuff. I've done some really weird stuff with React, but that's probably my own fault and not React's fault.
I mean, to some degree, if the API is not really, let's say, clear in terms of what you should do or shouldn't do, if there are many foot guns, then of course, in a way, it's like, skill issue or like education whatsoever. But it's a bit like, if it's a bit code and jokes are like, as in if you have to explain it, it's not really that good. So.
That's very good. Yeah. Code is a joke. because if you have to explain, it's not very good.
At least in that way, it's similar enough, right? Though I'm a bit fascinated that you said, okay, you chose Vue, so it's the easiest to contribute to, especially aiming at people who maybe never wrote line of like front end code, like quote unquote modern framework front end code before. It's just interesting because I talked to a few people, and Omar McAdam, for example, created Uninbox and moved it eventually from Nuxt to Next.js. And I hope we'll have in a podcast in the future talk about all that as well. In terms of, okay, we want to have more contributors for the open source project just because the React and the whole ecosystem is so big. So going the other way around of saying, okay, it's maybe not easier, let's say, but it's more accessible to people because, as you mentioned before, like the whole like loop of like, okay, bootcamps, we learn React, this is the thing we know that's there. So do you think that's just because back then it wasn't that, let's say, that major as it is right now, it was still like a different time, or would you still do the same again if you have the choice now?
I would do the same again. As a matter of fact, we are.
Oh.
Spoiler alert. No, yeah, I think it's still true. It's still very much true. I think Next.js brought a lot of those opinions into the mix. I do think that in more modern sort of React development, it sort of Next.js became sort of the standard with their self-hosting model there as a sort of, typical funnel. So I think that brought a lot of those opinions. We're fair and square in opinion territory, so get in the comments if you have other thoughts. But it's like, I think there's still a lot of sort of design choices from, the 2015 era React that are starting to come back and just be annoying now, that make it not the right choice for me. And that is kind of just the answer there. Whereas with the Vue 3, especially now with the composition API, the Vue bits of it feel very minimal, because like the HTML is effectively just HTML with a couple of attributes. The CSS, literally just CSS. Like you're not doing camel casing or anything else. There's no shenanigans going on, unless you use Tailwind. Different podcast for a different day. But it's still it's just HTML, it's just CSS, and the JavaScript now, because you effectively just write it yourself, right, with the compositions, composables, make it so that it feels the least frameworky somehow, even though it's still opinionated in its own right. Does that make sense? It's a bit rambling.
I would say it makes sense. I said it in a different podcast, actually, the Contagious podcast with Tejas Kumar. I was saying, I would even say Vue is more just JavaScript than React itself, and
Weirdly,
it feels the same way, funnily.
Yeah.
So I totally agree with that sentiment. To be like, it's more close to the standard if you know HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. You can easily get into that even more now with the composition API.
Yeah. And I think over time, more and more frameworks are coming on the scene. The joke is every week, but it might be more often than that. Who knows? But it also means that, there's more and more folks that do end up coming out of a Svelte environment, first and foremost, that are trying to contribute, or they've used Angular at their work for a decade before they jumped in, or they've been Drupal developers for the last 30 years and they're now trying to contribute something. So there's like a lot more entry points than just the sort of usual web framework bubbles of folks that are trying to contribute. So I think the ease of getting started there is still true to this day. Yeah.
I've always wondered about the whole supply and demand aspect of this thing too, because people often say like, oh, should I learn React or should I learn Vue if I want to get a job?
Right.
And people are like, well, there are way more React jobs, but it's also there are way more React developers applying for those jobs. So like, at what point is like you can't just look at the supply of the jobs. You have to look at the demand for the jobs, or I don't know, flip that around. But how does that come into it?
For this one? And we're gonna get in trouble with this. Personal blessing from a company's perspective, right? So like the Directus project grew to a point, a bit of required backstory to see why this makes sense. Project grew to a point where it turned into a full-time job and a half. And then of course you have to start making money off it. So we did the typical open source thing. We started, putting some revenue models in place, and it's grown to a company over time. That also means that I had to sort of onboard new core maintainers over time to make sure, because it went from one full-time job to 20 full-time jobs of maintenance work and features and stuff. So how do you do that hiring in the first place is like a whole new challenge that as a developer you never think about. But then if you're thrown into the, oh, now you're in charge of finding another developer seat, you learn so much from sort of the other side of what that looks like. And what I've noticed over time is like, to answer that question the way I would answer it right now is like, it doesn't matter as long as you can learn either of them quick. Like that's the important skill. It's not so much that you know React very well, because it will change. Like whatever you know today is irrelevant 2 years from now. That is just an evergreen truth. So it's like the ability to be, you know, excited about learning the new thing and not feeling bad that your sort of home turf gets ripped from underneath. That's the real skill. I feel like that is important to learn.
I would definitely agree with that it's like any like good developer should be able to learn eventually. Like it takes time to learn a new framework, of course, but like you should be able to learn, like React and Vue are not that different at like once you get into it.
I think that is funnily enough to me the crucially important part there in the middle, because like I'm right there with you. To me, it's like, okay, once you know and internalize the concept of like a component model and reactive updates and some of sort of like the general store strategies around, you know, you have mutations and then that goes to a server somewhere. Like that is applicable to all of these frameworks. But there's a lot of folks that start deep within React, but they never sort of get to the theoretical level there. They just do the execution part. And then it's super difficult to switch because now you're like, where's use effects?
Yeah.
It doesn't exist. It's gone. But if you're like, oh, but you can just do a compute it and just do this, and then it's the same underlying, you know, reactivity model, then it becomes easy again. So it's like, I think that's a perfect example of the whole, you know, be able to learn it.
Yeah, like the concepts. I mean, funnily, as someone who went to university and did a CS degree there, and Michael as well, a lot of times people said like, yeah, it's nice to learn tech, but understand the concepts. And I think there as well, it's also something that Evan, for example, said about like, yeah, of course you can say you're a React developer or a Vue developer, or Angular as well developer, but at the end we're all front-end developers. And if you want to find a job, then well, you can, if you know one of these frameworks and are able to like map the concepts to another one, it's like, okay, it's more about onboarding. It's more about getting to learn a framework, especially how the company uses the framework. That's a whole another discussion again.
Right.
And
right. Yeah, it's a whole different thing. Yeah. Yeah.
So then it's really more about like, okay, hey, look here, I have some work done in framework X. I can do it in framework Y as well. I maybe took some time to showcase that I understand a few things. If you want to ask me some questions around that. And give me a bit of time and I'll be of use, and I'm excited to do that. And I think that's key. Yeah.
I know it's a lot more opinionated in the tech industry now, but if you compare the similar discussion in any other industry, it immediately sounds silly. Like, for example, I mean, you can clearly tell I play a lot of music on the side, but it's like if I go to audition for a band or a play or something, the first question that I'm asking myself is not, oh, what guitar am I bringing? Because that's not to make it or break it, right? It's like I'm just a musician. I show up, and then I'll make the tools fit the goal, not the other way around, right? It's not like I'm not searching for gigs just based on the exact tooling that I bring along. It's the other way around. You find the tooling for the job.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. Also, for everybody listening, not checking the video, check now what is behind Rijk's back.
Yeah.
You might have guessed it already.
It's a guitar.
Exactly.
Yeah. But it's the same. It goes for every other industry, right? It's like you're not going to go to a construction site and hire somebody or not hire somebody because they use, I don't know, one brand of drill over another. That matters not at all, right? I see you're laughing right now. It's like, it makes no sense. It's like you know how to do the job with the tools that are available to you, but it doesn't matter what tool it is. I think that's very important. And that it's a long-winded way of saying, doesn't matter what framework you start with, as long as you just, are able to pick one up at a moment's notice.
I feel like this is a good opportunity for me to plug 2 of my courses, which are actually about patterns and like the conceptual things that actually transfer to other things quite easily, more than like, oh, this is how you do slots in Vue. So the one that I've had out for a while now is about component patterns, so dealing with components and single file components and all that kind of stuff, Clean Components Toolkit. And I don't know when this podcast is coming out, but I will be either launching soon or have launched one on composables. So we were talking before, it's kind of just like writing JavaScript, but there are also some other like interesting things and patterns that you can do to sort of wrap your head around that better. So just going to slip that in there.
Where can we find this? Yeah, I was going to say.
Links all in the description or in the show notes as usual. Otherwise, on Michael's website.
Very good.
Right?
There you go. Yeah.
With like a big banner straight away when you
Yeah.
like a non-clickaway pop-up, like, hey. Oh boy. No, of
Yeah,
course.
when you try and close a tab, it'll say, wait, don't leave.
Are you sure?
I sure
And it'll be
will.
a picture of me crying and yeah.
And on that note, I also want to plug something. The plot twist, it's of neither of us, actually. It's from Daniel Rowe, who leads the Nuxt team and is planning on making a course.
Ah.
It's called React to Nuxt, and it's available on react2nuxt.com. Also link down there somewhere. It's not there yet, but if you are, very unlikely, but if you are a React developer listening to that podcast, because you might be interested in Vue.js, could be, right? Maybe not.
Or
that
send
unlikely.
this to all your friends who are React developers and bring them over.
Exactly. Like, check that out. He's working on a course. He's like, yeah, it will be pretty amazing. And otherwise, last thing, I did it. I migrated a little Next.js application over to Nuxt.js in like an hour. It's really not that big, but just concept-wise could be also interesting. So, yeah, React to any other better framework advertisement block over here. But coming from that, and also from the job search topic, which I think it's always really good to focus, as we all said, on the concepts and on the skills actually, and also to show them. I would be just so like happy to hire people that are just interested in the things, right? That they show like they show actual passion, and like always the green flag is like, hey, people going to meetups. They're like, oh yeah, I on my free time, if there's a meetup in the city, of course, right, or online, I'll go to these, I'll listen, and that's always like. People going to meetups, you usually want to hire them because they're a lot of the developers actually care about it. And for me, it's always a good sign, so to say.
I mean, it's a super frustrating job if you're not sort of interested in it, right? It's like, I don't think programming is one of those jobs you can do if you're not intrinsically just interested or curious about tech, like in sort of that realm. It's just too frustrating. Otherwise, like we've all banged our head against the wall for hours on end trying to solve a problem. But you know, if that doesn't excite you, then it's going to be a tough one. Yeah.
I guess it's even tougher if you come into like a legacy code base and you have to migrate things all over with a framework.
Mm-hmm.
And this especially happened to your code base, not only yours.
Very good segue. Yeah.
Thanks. There's many others out there. But yeah, so the Directus team did it. You migrated, but so it's like, yeah, Vue 2 to Vue 3, like the obvious things. But it's kind of a quadruple migration. It has been
fascinating time. So at the time, mind you, front-end developer, first time really doing big app or sort of complicated app, bit of both. First time Vue. So the first iteration of the app, this is very early days of the open source project, right? It was trial and error, bit rough around the edges, proof of concept, really. So a lot of things worked really well. A couple of things really did not at all, like on a foundational level. Happens, right? First iteration happens. So it was right around that time that it was like, okay, we were also moving the API from the PHP stack of olden days to a Node.js-based system. And it was right around the time that the very first ideas around the composition API came out. This was before the sort of compatibility package layer, opt-in proof of concept. It was before any of it. It was just the first, couple of tweets and blog posts with screenshots of like, is this anything? That I was like, yes, yes, that is the thing. Give me to it now. So it was just a very interesting turn of events that the timelines, like the stars aligned for all of it, right? So the composition API, Evan was working on that as that Vue 2 package for people to opt in and leave feedback. You had Eduardo working on what later became Pinia and sort of the replacement for Vuex at a fairly similar time. Once the composition API package shipped, you had, with the composition API, way more opportunity to use TypeScript effectively. So that was very interesting around a similar time. You had the Vue CLI that was sort of being replaced or phased out by Vite around the same time. So it was just a funny moment that it was like, oh, here I find myself at a point that I'm like, okay, I need to make some big foundational upgrades to our Vue app to just get rid of some of the sort of mistakes made in the early days, to make this something that we can run with for years rather than months. And you have all of these interesting improvements happening at the exact same time in sort of that Vue ecosystem. And it was just too good to pass. So I took a tremendous risk at the time and just be like, npm install Pinia 0.0.1. Here we go. With the intent for, this is going to be a big production app that is used all over the place. But it was sort of that. And it was just because I believed in the APIs of it that much that I was looking at the composition API in those very early days. And I was like, this is such a tremendous improvement over the component API that or the options API. I keep forgetting.
Yes.
I don't know why.
Haven't used this for so long.
I guess that's really why. It also had never had a name until it became the old thing. And then it had a name all of a sudden.
Yeah. Fair.
I guess I call it the object API just because anyways, doesn't matter.
It's a big object.
It was just a giant object.
But let's just stop real quick there, because I think that's super interesting. So you straight away had the hunch of like, okay, composition API, like it's miles better than the options API. Why?
It was because you can organize the file itself by sort of logical grouping instead of what it's for. So in the options API, to write it down. On the options API, everything was grouped by the type of thing that it is. So all of your computers were in the same block, in the same property. All your methods are in the same property. All your data props are in the same. Your what you would call refs now are in the same block. Your props are in the same block. That, it makes sense conceptually, but at the same time, once you have bigger components or just more complicated workflows, or God forbid, you want to share methods between components, that gets tricky pretty quick. And we noticed the same with some type safety things as well, because of, to access all the data, you would go this.data, blah, blah, blah. That also meant that sort of getting TypeScript to work well into that mix in those days was basically, you could kind of with some pain and suffering, but it really wasn't worth the effort yet, right? So the composition API sort of removed a lot of those pain points, because now I could group my files by, okay, here's everything that has to do with sort of this responsibility, and just get all the refs and all the computers and all of the methods just in the same vibe, in the same part of the file. And it also helped that it became a little bit less opinionated again, funnily enough, or in the sense that it's I am catching myself in the funny irony that I said earlier that it was more opinionated. That's a good thing, but it did mean that you didn't have to go searching through like a this dot chain to find some data, because you had a variable that you defined yourself, and that's the thing that you're talking to. So I think from a mental model, that sort of simplified things a little bit.
I would say that just became a bit more JavaScript again.
It became a bit more
nice
JavaScript-y. Yeah. No, exactly. And that just took it one step closer to the sort of, it is just HTML, JavaScript, and CSS with a bunch of utility functions that you can use to make it even better. Like that's kind of the feeling that it raised, which was just, I felt like right at home. And at the same with Pinia, like Vuex was really good for what it did. But at the same time, the model of like you're defining an action, and that then runs a mutation that goes into a store, and then that sort of updates somewhere, and then you pull the data out. And it's like the mental model of that. And I had the same with Redux in the React land way back in the day, which had a similar mental model. And it was always just a bit tricky, because I'm like, it's just JavaScript. Just let me update a variable. What are we doing here? So when, the very, very earliest thoughts about Pinia came out, that it was like, this is literally just a ref like I would use in my own components, but in a separate file. Well done.
There we go.
High fives all around. High fives all around. This is all I need. Yeah. This is all I want. So I had a similar thing that I'm like, because, in a platform like Directus, we have, 15, 16 different stores with interlinked dependencies, and like some very specific hydration points where some of these stores need to be loaded in a certain order and all that kind of stuff. I was like, okay, I need to make a choice now. I either set up that complicated system in Vuex again and then don't change it for 5 years, or I'm going to take a gamble, use Pinia, and roll with the punches and the breaking changes as they come. because this is 001. I know there will be breaking changes and loads of them. Just because I know that the sort of 5-year plan, it's going to be way better because of it. And that was the risk that we took, and it's paid out, luckily.
Yeah.
It paid out luckily. It was a gamble. I'll be the first to admit. It's like that is a risky move that you got to know what you're getting yourself into, but it paid out. It paid out big time. And I'm very glad we did it.
And just to mention that back then when Pinia was released, it was not clear that it would replace Vuex at some point.
It was an
That's
experiment.
another thing.
It was communicated as, hey, I'm the author of Vuex. I have a new idea. Let's see if this is anything. It's just a little thing on the side. And then I was like, this is the thing.
to remark, like, Eduardo didn't even write Vuex, right? Like, this was just like...
Right.
He did router, right? It was like, maybe state management could be a bit easier. So that's I think even more of an achievement. Like, hey, I wasn't even involved in Vuex. Of course, he used it obviously, and was aware of internals and stuff. But still, And here we are with a shiny, the one way to go state management tool called Pinia. Right.
And even to go back to the whole, it's just JavaScripty part. It also feels like a state management tool you can just use for anything else, right? That's also kind of nice. It's of course made for Vue first and foremost, but at the same time, it feels like the mental model of it and just the way that reactivity works under the hood, it doesn't feel coupled to Vue at all, like which is just very neat. Big fan of that. Yeah, and then around the same time, because you're now in this composition API, this was still Vue 2 with that sort of opt-in, let's try it out before it becomes a thing library. Because Vue 3 was, again, I think there was some rumblings and rumors, but I'm a little hazy on the timeline details. It's been so long ago now, but it's like, I want to say the composition API came out as an idea first, and then Vue 3 rumblings started around, there's some big improvements under the hood, and then the composition API became that package, and it became more and more defined, and then sort of Vue 3 came out with it baked in from the start. I want to say that's sort of
that's almost right there. I think like composition API, of course, was drafted before, but also in anticipation of Vue 3.
Right. Yeah.
So and then the thoughts were, can we even backport that to Vue 2? That was like ideally yes, and that's why the package, the Vue 2 package, what came out later, because it took a while and eventually was like then integrated in Vue 2.7 even without the package, so you can use the composition API without that, which is great.
I just remember that composition API being available in Vue 2 through that sort of opt-in additional library.
Yes,
that was
before 2.7.
Before Vue 3 was even available to beta test at that point, I want to say. So, but we had the same thing. I was like, well, I want to switch to Vue 3 the second it comes out. But I do want to wait for that one to be sort of a stable production release before it comes out. But the composition API felt like, okay, this is both a huge deal, but also small enough in scope where I was like, okay, I feel like I can roll with the punches for the breaking changes that come with this. So we just ran with it immediately, just as with Pinia, and it worked out. It worked out. Luckily, but it worked out. There's a lesson in there around, who do you trust with that, and what libraries am I willing to take that risk with? And I think it has a lot to do, credit what credit's due, with just the author behind the hood. Like I would never do such a 001 thing with most every other library, right? This is just coming from, I've used Vue Router a long, long time before. I sort of trust the development model and trust, the source. And the same with Vue, obviously, that I'm willing to take a risk like that. But if it was any other library, I would think twice. Like this is not, I do not take this as a tip. Build your stuff in 0-point libraries. Just don't do it. Don't do it. That's the lesson learned. But sometimes it works.
But if Eduardo makes it, then it's okay.
Then maybe.
Eduardo, Evan, all good. Otherwise, treat with care, so to say.
I'm sure they'll be thrilled to hear that. They're shaking, like, ow, yelling at their screens right now. It's funny how that works, but it is true. It is true that raises a lot of trust. Now, of course, I don't want to make it sound like it was all roses and sunshine, because it really wasn't. There's a lot of sort of pain points that we saw a lot of things coming, by taking that risk, like, of course you're going to have breaking changes. Like Pinia straight up does not exist. It's an inkling of an idea. It's the concept of a plan. And then, how does that grow over time? Nobody knows yet, because nobody really knows if it even takes off in the first place. So of course you have to be prepared for breaking changes in there. The parts that I sort of, in hindsight is very obvious, but didn't see coming at the time was things like, because nobody's ever done it before, how do you write unit tests for a Pinia store? Like that was just a question that was not answered yet. There was just no way. Because at that time with the composition API plugin, I think you had to, again, this is just so long ago, I might be wrong here, but there was something around you had to mount it inside of a component for the composition part to kick in, and therefore for your Pinia stores to kick in. But that in turn also meant that for unit tests, now you have a bit of an interesting problem, because your Pinia store is a separate file, but you cannot just test it in isolation. So what do, right? So at the time, I did a bunch of experiments, set up like a little mini sort of test component that would just import the store to run it, and then run the unit tests within the sort of setup of a Vue component. It was a bit, and it worked, and it was great. It's like, this is fantastic. It just works fantastic. Did that for all of the stores, all of the tests, all the unit tests, great. That's the point where it was like, ooh, that shouldn't have done that. Shouldn't have done that. Because then, of course, breaking change of Vue 2 to Vue 3, now that part is both irrelevant and works totally different under the hood. All of those are now just officially pointless. Because the way I had to write the test is that it was poking at the Vue component to see the output of Pinia rather than just the Pinia store itself, right?
Yes.
So that was the part that I really was like, ooh, that is a part that I didn't account for with all the breaking changes in these libraries. Second big one there was Storybook. Like I use that heavily to just have my component library and just debug it and click around, test it, and build it. Because I'm just a very visual builder. I like seeing the stuff that I'm writing live, right? Same thing. Vue 3 files didn't exist. Nope. Right? This is not a thing. Composition API kind of sort of worked because it was still in Vue 2, so that sort of compatibility kind of worked. But then there's an update to Storybook, no longer works. There's an update to Vue, no longer works. Storybook at one point had a similar timeline, had an experimental, I want to say it was like a markdown mode. It's like you wrote a markdown file with all your docs and then you inline some components. I was like, this is sick. Like that is really the way that I like thinking about this stuff. Use that with Vue 3, same thing. It all worked until it super didn't.
Yep.
Because we made it work. I made it work on the sort of, okay, you have a 0.1 talking to a 0.5.1 to a 0.3, and everything works, and life is fantastic for the 3 weeks that it worked.
Yeah, and one version bump later, one patch even, it's over. Yes.
That was just one of those things that I'm like, again, I don't regret it. It's just one of those things that you're like, oh, of course, you don't think about Storybook maintenance over time if you're thinking about updating your component model, right? It's just one of those things. Of course, in hindsight, it's like, yeah, no shit, it's all connected. But in the moment, those are the parts you don't think about. Yeah.
No. Though it's interesting in a way because, for example, for the tests, it's really good that you at least then, okay, you had tests. Sure, you had to update how you set up the Pinia store to be tested. But at least you could still say, I have all my cases. I just have to make it work again, then apply it to all. So you don't start from zero, but tests. What is this?
The funny thing, though, and this is again, this is a product of, this is a one-person job, and you just do proof of concepts and moving quick. Once all of the tests broke, you'd never go to sit down and spend a week to just fix them all. That just didn't happen, because it was like at that point in time, you're working on. It's incredibly quick development cycle. It is still early days in the project where it's like, is this a thing rather than this is the thing to use, right? So you're still in a very experimental mode. And at that point, if somebody tells you now all of the tests are gone, are you going to go sit down and rewrite all of them? Because it wasn't so much a migration at that point, unfortunately, because of the whole hacky system where it had to go into a component first and you then inspect the component instead of the store output, it does mean that, yeah, the cases are kind of there, but you still have to rewrite them all to fit, the different place to look for what you're expecting and all that kind of stuff. And it just never happened. just straight up never happen again, right? And then over time you include new ones, like whenever you make a patch or a change, and it's like, okay, well, you just started to add them back in over time. But that was like that I'm thinking of. Like, I think unit testing as a whole is just a whole different topic for a different podcast, of course. But I think that's one of those things that, listen, learn, you have to include it from day one in the way that you want to maintain them for years to come, because otherwise you won't, and then you might as well not have them.
Interesting. Yeah, I think it's fair, especially as the development cycle is very rapid, and you're like, okay, here are new things coming in, and our tests are broken now, and maybe some things don't need to be tested because they, well, in 2 weeks, not sure if they're there, or tomorrow if we have to change them again.
Right. I think that was the biggest part of it for me, especially in those days. The earliest Vue app, the first one, it's like, I don't know how any of this is supposed to work. I don't know what any of this is supposed to look like. We're designing in code, and we're implementing all of these features and things based on the feedback that is coming in real time. So therefore, to your point, it's like I can write a unit test that is like, this is how it works, Monday the 16th, but it does not work like that on Thursday, right? And then it's like, okay, how much time do we invest if that is the development model? And again, that's for prototyping and proof of concepts, right? For production stuff, highly support doing tests, but it's a different point in time at that point.
Yeah. Also, or like, where do you spend your limited time on as well? Like, obviously, if your prototype just say like, hey, we want to get something up and running, see if it works. If it doesn't, let's squash it and build a new thing, or like build differently. Sure, totally understandable. Like, then better focus on making the MVP or the POC as good as possible.
I've seen some people recently who, like for smaller teams and earlier projects, they just write end-to-end tests, like with Playwright, for example, because then you get, like, they're not that hard to write, and you get pretty good coverage, and they're less likely to break because they're not like as coupled to implementation. So you can still have that speed, but have a little bit of like, okay, people can log into our app, and you know that that's going to work. And like, you know, when you're starting out, that's like the main thing, you know,
For
people
sure.
can buy the thing, people can log in, they can, you know, do the main thing, the main action on the app, and like, okay, base is covered.
Yeah. Because at that point, the only thing you really want to know from your tests is, does it still work? Yes or no? Like, that's what you want to know. And everything else you can figure out from there and just keep moving quick. It's like, once you get to the point, it's like, I want to know the exact place where it broke and who broke it and what commit and all that kind of stuff. Now you're in the territory where it's like, okay, you need to start thinking about tightly coupling it. But it's a very good point, because I think a lot of devs sort of circle it all the way back to, you know, what do you learn first? I think unit tests are one of the sort of deceptively luring options that you have available, because you have just a tool that says, well, you're 90% done.
Yeah,
right?
coverage.
Yeah, you have coverage. And once the tool says 100%, you're like,
easy.
Done. But that also means that you end up writing tests for, to your point, Michael, every tiny little permutation of every tiny function, that in the bigger whole, is that worth spending your time on, or are you just trying to chase a number? Depends, right? Depends on the team and the thing you're building and where it is and what's the risk and how fast do you want to move and all that. Yeah.
Or you're just chasing that high of the green check marks.
Yeah.
Lighting up.
Numbers go up, check marks go green.
That is fun.
That's fair. No, I also think like unit tests, especially as you said, like this is what you usually learn first, because like, okay, end to end is a bit more complicated. You also have to have something, not just like a function, but like something that you can actually test. Like, oh, if I click on that button and show something. I still think, especially for like some business logic stuff, it's always nice to have them around, right? Even, I don't know, for some tiny helpers, just to, okay, you test them anyway. And if I start like, hey, I boot my app up in this super complex environment, and now I add a function there, and I just want to test 3 cases, or okay, I simply like, okay, it's a pure function. I did the input, output, all good. I just boot up a test case, all fine, and it doesn't hurt as long as there is a CI set up already, and it will actually also run on every commit, which is another thing, right? And I especially prefer that when it's like not, let's say, coupled to a framework. It's more like contextless and just like business logic, because that's also where it's really helping. Like, yeah, sure, you can test your button component, but you also can just have an end-to-end test, make sure you can log in or sign up, as Michael said as well. Or
it's just to your point, like the fact that you can click a button, that's important, because if your button doesn't click, everything goes to hell. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that somebody can log in. Those two are not the same, right? It's like you need both to test both sides. But it's kind of funny, because like end-to-end test has always been such a tricky thing, and this is just a specific byproduct of the Directus project. It's like, because we're trying to support so many different underlying databases, it means that in order to have an end-to-end that is proper end-to-end, it means that in our CI, we do run it still, but we're about to just overhaul that because it doesn't scale anymore. It's like we spin up in the CI 7 different databases through containers, and then 7 copies of Directus, one configured to each database, and then run the tests in parallel to each of those 7 copies of the app. Takes about 45 minutes. Like it's
Yeah.
it just doesn't it stopped working the more databases we add, because that just goes, you know, exponentially up in minutes used on GitHub, and you know, the maintainability of it all, because I can't even run it locally anymore now on ARM, because like one of the databases just straight up does not have a container that works.
Really? Oh wow.
So what do you do then? Right? It's like, if I cannot run Oracle DB on my local machine, where do we go from here? So now you have to trust the CI, but then if that takes 45 minutes, it gets really quite fiddly.
Yeah.
So we've reached the point now where it's like, okay, end to end, like proper end to end is kind of no longer an option for the project that we're building. It has to be integrations that are just a bit wide, like a little end to end, but instead of hitting a database, it just hits an abstraction of a database, so we can check that it would have done the right thing. And then each database abstraction needs its own set of tests to make sure if that input is correct and it does the right thing, because otherwise it became untestable to do full end to end in that setup.
I think that's a key point about end-to-end tests, is that they're always thought of as being like representative of, like, this is the actual thing. Like, this is fully real. We're not doing any like shenanigans here. But actually, I think most end-to-end tests, you are faking some parts. You are like mocking out, whatever word you want to use for that. Like, you just have to like decide where that line is, what that boundary is. And so, like, yeah, for like your case, it doesn't make sense to spin up 7 different databases. And so, you know, maybe you do have that run, but not as part of CI, right. Or, you know, you have all these different decisions because you don't want to, 45 minutes to wait to find out that your PR doesn't doesn't build is not,
it's not good.
It's not great.
No,
so,
it's not
or
good.
that it's all fine. Like 45 minutes, like, oh, I knew.
Yeah, right. Yeah. No, so that just, like, you know, that came out of a world where way back in the day it was just one database type, and then it worked perfectly fine, because now you had just MySQL and you spin up Directus and you have the full proper end to end. You can test the whole thing. It's amazing. Yeah. And then it's like, all right, let's support more types of databases. And then over time it's like, okay, we've reached that point now of scaling where that you just have to be like, okay, not that.
And I also think like the tricky part of end-to-end testing, if we come back to like why people start with unit tests, for example, is like, okay, the whole setup part, like, yeah, you have to have, let's say you have a software as a service application. Okay, cool. You need like seed data. You need to keep them in sync and up to date. I had it also in like multiple client projects, like, okay, we want end-to-end test. Like, how do we start? Staging environment is that? What is part? And once again, where do we fake the data? Like, how representative is the data actually to what the users use? And it's a big hassle on its own, but it's definitely worth doing, especially if we start with simple cases that are mission critical, which is usually the tiny thing you have. Even it's just like, does the app start? Like, I start my application and I can see things, because a unit test will not tell you that if your application is up and running, but an end-to-end test will, ideally.
I think the most difficult part there is just to answer the question of what is the right level of testing at a certain point in the development stage of the project, or at all. So one other thing, which in hindsight sounds absolutely bonkers, but it was true, is like I used to work at a web development agency where for most websites, this is smaller, you know, little websites from companies around, you know, the Amsterdam region and sort of the Netherlands as a whole. Like at that company, didn't use any Git at all. It was just all straight on a live development server. No tests whatsoever, just full stop. And it was fine, because it's like, you just make a change, you hit save, it just goes to the live production server. And if you mess it
FTP,
up, just straight FTP it up, and you refresh the website, and it's like, oh, whoops, and you just fix it and it's done. But it's like, it's a fairly low risk environment. But I'm like, in hindsight, you know, again, testing, tremendously good thing. I can't stress it enough for production environments. But at the same time, there are some projects where you can get away with taking more risks, right? And the amount of time and effort that you save, you can reinvest into making the thing better to a point where tests become important. So there's such an interesting balance in like,
Yeah.
tests are a good thing, but at the same time, if you are, chasing the 100% whole green check marks all the time, you might be investing a hell of a lot of time into something that might not matter as much quite yet.
And especially if it comes to your own application and you have like 0 customers.
Especially if it's like internal. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So if you write like unit tests before having a single customer, maybe double check.
It's just it's such a case by case, and it's such an opinionated thing. And some developers they do everything test driven because that's just the way they're sort of that's how they are more efficient. That they think about when does it pass, write the test first, and then implement the thing. Fully support it. Like if that's your way of working, then good for you. But it's just an interesting thing because there's no rules for how to test. There's no rules of how to test if your tests are relevant yet, right? There's no one answer that says, oh, at this point in the life cycle of a product, do you start using XYZ or something like it? Because it's so different. It depends on who's your audience, who's your user, how much risk are you willing to take? Are people expect, like if it's a 0 release, are they expecting things to break? Sure. At that point, do you care as much about locking it down yet, or are you just in a quick cycle? And it's like, it depends on so many things.
This might be a little bit of a tangent, but I thought I'd throw it in there. So there's this concept called mutation testing. I don't know if you've heard of this. I spent one internship researching it, but it was very interesting. And basically the concept is you have this thing that tests how good your tests are. And basically like, it will it basically changes one piece of your code base. So like it'll change addition to subtraction, and then it will run your test suite, and then it will say, do any of these tests fail? Because one of them should. And if none of your tests fail, then that bug is not caught, that mutation is not caught. And so then you basically go through like, it's this exponential explosion of like, okay, for each line you can do all these different changes, and and it's just like, so there's like, I think it's mostly used in like research areas because it's not feasible like computationally, because there's just so many like, it's crazy.
But there's also an infinite amount of permutations. Like on every single line of code you can do.
Yeah, but then there's like research for like, oh, there's this subset. If you use these 7 changes, you can catch like 90% of potential bugs. And so then, but anyway, I thought I'd throw it out there.
It's actually it's really fun because I actually researched the same thing in university with a friend of mine back then to get some credits. And there is a framework out there called Striker for JavaScript to do exactly that mutation testing. We used it back then. Finally, I met the author. Shout out here to Nico Jansen, who is not living too far away actually, in Belgium, I think. Hope didn't get it wrong. Otherwise, Nico, correct me somewhere in the comments or so. Like last year, the conference was really funny to like, I haven't used it for ages. It's like, wait, Striker, like has the shirt, like the logo is like very, very dominant colors. And I was like, wait, I know that. It was super fun. But yeah, it's especially interesting, like the low level programming with like, okay, if you change things here and then, you have like memory, like you have like some issues with, I don't know, stack overflows or like using memory that's not allocated or whatnot, right? Like we all know well devs, I guess. So the people roughly have an idea what we're talking about.
I'm just immediately curious, what does the testing look like for Striker?
Well, we have a link in the show notes for that.
Exactly. I'm sure it's going to be a very self-referential thing, isn't it? Because I'd bet money that Striker is using Striker to test Striker, and it just gets super interesting.
Indeed, and they also support TypeScript, Mary. So it's like there's a lot of things to look into that. I wish I'd have more time because I think it's a super interesting part of the whole thing. Like, are tests relevant? Are they actually testing something? And not only by saying I deleted and the coverage is the same, right? For like unit tests.
Also, semi-related, I'm wondering, a bit of a hot take maybe, and again, don't take this as gospel, but I'm also curious how much the usability of unit tests goes down a little bit the stronger you make your type system. Because like that's another thing I noticed when we switched to TypeScript, that it's like a lot of the unit tests that we had to write ahead of time, which is like, okay, we have to make sure that the parameter that is input, that it doesn't break if you throw it a null or an object instead of a string or whatever, right? Or you have to make sure that it is strongly equal, strict equal instead of a regular equals or something like that. But with TypeScript, the moment you make it super strict and you don't allow any any's or unknowns or anything like that floating around, at that point you get a level of guarantees around what the types are coming in and out of functions. So therefore, as long as the output type still matches as defined and the input type still matches as defined, now you're unit testing that the operation within is correct, but you don't have to, the coverage number that you're trying to hit can go down quite a bit because you can just rely on your type system for a large chunk of what usually had to be unit tests before that, which is interesting. Yeah,
the TypeScript sort of eliminates some of those unit tests that you don't need to write otherwise.
It also makes your functions a hell of a lot brittle for for the same reason, which is like if I'm making a thing with a public API and somebody's importing my function in another project, but in my code I use TypeScript, and therefore I know that the input parameter is a string, and I don't check for any other cases. It's fine for internal stuff because I know where I'm calling it and the type system checks it on both sides. But if it's some other person that is using Node.js without TypeScript or anything else, they can run into some very strange behavior because I never bothered to implement any of the type checking anymore, even though it's still JavaScript under the hood, right? Bit odd. It's like we're still writing JavaScript with TypeScript. So therefore, did we end up writing worse JavaScript because we were relying on it? Hot take?
I would argue that really like the people that don't use TypeScript, they are responsible to make sure if it's documented that like, oh, this method only takes a string and you pass in a number or like null or undefined. That's not up to you as the library author, right? You documented, hey, this is the correct behavior. If you pass in a string, all good, then we can do that operation here and reverse it. If you pass a number, it's up to you. So if you don't use TypeScript, which is also fine, if that's your choice, or if you can't, like actually, I have heard companies saying we can't use TypeScript for a bunch of reasons, like, oh, we have to get every npm package approved and all.
Oh yeah, I believe it. Compliance. Yeah.
Yes, compliance especially. Yeah. Then like, okay, then you have to make sure that this is really a string, and then that's sadly up to you in a way. Probably like your IDE can still help you, right? But you get runtime errors.
Is it though? Because at the same time, from a library is nice to use perspective. It's like if I use a library and I use it wrong accidentally because I misremember or I read the docs wrong, and it just throws an error that shows me exactly what I did wrong, I have such a better experience using this thing that I'm way more likely to keep using it long term. Whereas if it just behaves weird with no explanation as to what is happening or how to fix it, what ends up happening is I go to GitHub, I open an issue, and it's like, it behaves weird. And then the author is like, well, yeah, you're using it wrong. Like that whole circle of annoyance on everybody's side could have been prevented by adding those
by using
checks,
TypeScript.
Right? Or by using TypeScript. Sure. So it's just funny how that works because we're still targeting JavaScript, even though we're writing TypeScript. Right? We're not saying this is a TypeScript only library. We're saying it's a thing you can import with JavaScript, even though we wrote it with TypeScript and we expect you to use it. But that does set a different expectation model. That if I were to make a new, let's say we have like the Directus SDK or something. It's like a separate library. People install it into their own projects. You import the function you want to use. We're in the same boat. We did it all in TypeScript. We expect that the parameter of like what table you want to hit is a string. If it's not, Lord knows what happens. Like we don't account for that. We don't test against it. Haven't even thought about it because we're saying in TypeScript it's a string, therefore we assume it's a string. But nothing is checking that. Like somebody could import the function and just throw a Boolean in there and then things go weird. But at that point they don't break. They just behave weird, right? It's like things might work sometimes and not in other times. And it's just, it becomes annoying on both sides because it's like the end user doesn't know what they're doing wrong. So they come to ask in, either the Discord server or they come to ask on GitHub or elsewhere. They get annoyed, they're running into it. They're banging their heads. And it's like, is the answer that I then give well, sucks to suck, should have read the docs. Like that feels a bit weird as well. You know what I mean? But
just all the error messages are use TypeScript.
Right. Yeah. It's like, if you consider
A link to install it.
yeah, in order to open an issue, please use TypeScript first. It's just a bit of an interesting thing, which doesn't exist in other programming languages, for the record. Because like if you're in Java or Go or Rust or whatever other thing nowadays in Swift, like because you have a guarantee it's strongly typed on both sides, right? So you don't have to implement a lot of those checks because the thing won't compile in the first place if you use it wrong. And we don't have that luxury yet because we're still targeting JavaScript, which is an interesting,
I wonder how it is in a language that Directus was written in before, in PHP nowadays, given that like PHP hasn't had like type hints for a while, added it in, I don't know, 8 or so, or before, I think it was an 8, but I don't know. And how that will work nowadays. Like, okay, yeah, also there, you don't have a guarantee that what you do is fully typed. So there it might be a similar issue. But on the other hand, if you, let's say, if you as the consumer of a library, or like let's see you as an app developer, you write JavaScript deliberately or like because you're forced to, then you already make all these trade-offs and they say, okay, you read the docs to say this should be a string, and then ideally you already make sure that, oh, if it's not a string, then don't continue here in your own, let's say, wrapper function in your own, before calling that. Ideally, because usually you are aware, okay, we don't have any runtime errors, I have to, because I don't have any types, make sure this is what is getting passed in. And if you're aware that it should only be a string, then you would check that before, in theory. But I see the point in terms of it's a trade-off of like DX versus bundle size performance whatsoever, of saying, yeah, if that's a common mistake and people do it commonly, then there's a way around to fix that, which is giving an error message. The problem is, are the people really happier about that when their production environment just throws an error message? At least they can track it, right? That's good, or they see it in dev.
I think at any point, especially in development modes, you want to be told what you did wrong so you can fix it. It's like if you run into an error and it just behaves weird, now the answer of how long is it going to take to fix is anywhere from 2 seconds to 20 hours, right? Because you just don't even know where to look. You might have to pull up source code and figure it out.
Fair.
Which, funnily enough, call back to the whole Vue 2 free migration. One of the pain points that we also ran into at the time is that the SEO for the Vue 2 tutorials and docs were so good that it was near impossible to find any information about the composition API.
And I guess that was also just less available. Like there was,
of course, yeah.
It's new,
yeah. But it was a similar thing that it's like, okay, you run into weird behavior of the composition API. Now I'm at a point of like, okay, is that something that I did wrong? Probably, because I don't know how to use it yet, right? Where do I go to find this? How do I know what I did wrong? And it's like, if the tool doesn't tell me and there's no dev tooling around it, or TypeScript types or anything else, where do I go from there? And that is still the reality for a lot of people, because at the end of the day, we are shipping JavaScript to both Node.js, to the browser, to Bun, to, well, True. I guess Dino is a bit of an outlier there, but it's like,
fair, yeah.
I mean, even in Dino, you can have not strict TypeScript, so therefore it becomes, more of a hint than a requirement.
I wonder if you can solve that by just saying you have a dev bundle which is loaded there. You have all the error messages and say, hey, this error is only thrown in dev. In production, you have a minified version, which, well, makes it easier. You can even automatically tree shake that with like, I don't know, roll up when you bundle stuff. Say, oh, if this flag is not set, and remove these checks. That could be, I think, interesting to have that experience. Like Vue is also doing that with a lot of things like hydration errors, with validator warnings, whatnot, to just make sure, okay, in dev mode you have that DX. In production, you have the lean bundle. And if you pass something else there, too bad for you.
Yeah, for sure. But that puts a lot of additional, because to your point, I'm really much on the fence, right? I'm on the one hand, I'm advocating here for like, oh, we got to make sure that the executive libraries. At the same time, I'm not doing it for the exact same reasons you just outlined, because it's so much extra work to get that nice, and we are using TypeScript and expect people to do the same. So therefore, what's the point of spending all this extra effort in doing type checking in runtime if it already exists in TypeScript?
Yeah, it's this whole problem.
But it is a very interesting sort of like, where do you sit and how much do you value DX for non-TypeScript folks? And is it a TypeScript module? Should we just ship it and say this is a TypeScript library and it's intended to be used there only? And yeah, it's an interesting time in the industry, especially now that, you have those proposals to have type hints in native JavaScript. Like that opens up a whole different world of like, where do we go
Difficult.
from there? Yeah.
Yes, yes. Oh, really, really tricky.
I wonder what the adoption rate of TypeScript is like across companies. Like, I mean, obviously migrating from JavaScript to TypeScript can be a big chore. So not everyone, even if they want to, can just like switch over right away. So I wonder what the split there is. Is it like majority TypeScript, or is it just, all the stuff you see? There's this like weird perception issue that I've noticed where people think everyone is on the latest thing, everyone's on Vue 3, everyone is like doing this stuff, and then you talk with other people and you're like, oh wait, you're still on the version of Vue that's like not really supported anymore because it's like insane amount of work to do the migration, and we're trying to ship features.
I was going to say, in
we can't do it.
that how do you defend that on your roadmap, right? It's like, I'm going to spend 2
exactly.
months with my whole team and you get nothing in return from a business value perspective, right? Which is silly because, of course, we engineers know that you have to do it at some point. But from other stakeholders, how do you defend that? It's like you're circling, you're spinning your wheels, and then you get nothing in return.
Yeah.
Right?
Then me and Alex are out here just like, we're only talking about the new stuff. Like, I'm not talking about Vue 2 or Vuex or anything like that. And we're talking about the latest features and the new stuff that's coming around. And so there's this weird.
I had a very similar problem just the other day. It's like we've been running. So Directus is shipped as a Docker container, sort of the primary hosting model, because it's just the easiest for people to spin it up, right? Because you don't have all the native dependencies and all that kind of stuff. We have been running on Node.js 18 since it came out, but we didn't upgrade to 20 when it came out. Because I had a very similar moment in time that I'm like, okay, the upgrades between 18 and 20, yes, it's an improvement, but is it enough of an improvement to warrant upgrading the version of Node? Not really. I had some trouble just defending investing, a week or two in doing that. And I'm saying a week or two because we're dealing with Docker containers and a bunch of extensions and plugin authors and documentation updates and all that kind of stuff. There's a lot more that goes into it now. But then somebody rightfully opened an issue and was like, hey, are you going to update to Node 20? I'm like, yeah. And then somebody the other day was like, well, at this point, you might as well go to 22. And I'm like, well, honestly, though, that is now the plan. Yes.
Yeah.
Because like now,
skip a major.
Yeah, now Node 18 is going end of life. That's a very good reason to upgrade, and we will. But at the same time, it's like the benefits of that upgrade in between didn't outweigh the time investment and sort of the risk of breaking changes and all that kind of stuff, and extension authors in trouble and all that. But now that I'm like, okay, Node 22, 18 is end of life. Now there is a definite bump in performance. I can make it make sense, right? So we're going to do it. But it's funny how that works, because I was right there with you. I thought, oh, it's always going to be on the latest thing. And then now in real life, I'm like, nope.
As soon as it gets about business value and also like how to spend your time, as there are so many things around, like that's a common thing. And like quote unquote justifying like even package maintenance for business, there are ways, of course, to deal with that. But we had Sumit Kumar on here in the podcast in the last 2 episodes, actually, before this one, where he's running a SaaS like with 250,000 customers or like users logged in and registered. And he's also like, upgrading from Nuxt 2 to Nuxt 3, which is also like a huge thing, of course, like the Vue 2 to Vue 3 migration, like similar, maybe a bit more, a bit less. Depends. It's also like, pushing out as much as possible, because what you gain, sure, like developer productivity, but how do you measure that? How do you attribute it? And in the end, at some point, you don't really have a choice in terms of security, of course. Same with like end of life with versions, be it Vue 2, that's end of life for, almost a year now. Be it Node, it's always like, okay, it's end of life. That's one point. And there are then also sometimes libraries that say, hey, we don't support options API. We don't only do composition API, which is...
that you're just locked out. Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, you mentioned security, which I'm right there with you. It's like the second you have an end-of-life thing, you got to get out of it immediately, because if there's any security problem, then you're out of luck, right? At the same time, just looking at the user base of Directus in real life, the amount of people that don't upgrade, even if there's known security vulnerabilities and all that kind of stuff, they just don't. And it's like, they either don't care, or it's too much of a, I don't want to upgrade because then I have to double check that all my stuff still works, or, any of those things. But what I have noticed is that there's a lot of companies where even security patches are on the pool of like, oh, that is time spent without measurable output, so therefore it's time wasted. until it goes super wrong. And then the person who didn't do the upgrade is now at fault. You know what I mean? It's like, it's such a double-edged sword, but it is how it is. It is how it works at some companies, which is crazy, but I've seen it a lot more, and it worries me greatly. But yeah, just security patches by itself is not even, you know, for a lot of companies is not a reason, which is weird.
I mean, then thinking about, we'll go back to the status quo of like, okay, yeah, we had that incident now, but from then, whatever, or then it's finally like, hey, security updates are important. On the other hand, I also think like, I don't know, if you have an old running Vue 2 application, like if it's a done project, if there is no money for that, if it's working, do we really need to upgrade that? I don't think so.
That's another very good point. It's like this harks back to the agency days as well, but it's like we would build a WordPress theme that would up on the FTP server, hand it over to the customer, money gets paid. At that point, never touch it ever again, right? It's like you only touch it if somebody 5 years later reaches out and is like, oh, can we get an extra link in the nav? And then you pull up the code base. I'm not going to spend a week upgrading it to the latest and greatest. I'm just like
30 hacks, yeah.
30x, run it, and it's just like, I'm just going to heck it in and ship it, because that's the quickest way, that's the most efficient way, and therefore the most profitable way at the end of the day. That is how businesses run, right? It's whole money at the end of the day.
You can also tell your customer like, hey, look, yeah, we upgrade this now for 2 weeks, so it's up and running. And then he will say like, how much is this? And you say number, and he will say, no, thank you.
Yeah, so it's like, what do I get from this upgrade? I'm like, well, it's going to be a little faster and a little bit more secure. And the person's like, I don't care.
Whatever.
Yeah.
But especially for like all these custom projects, we're like, okay, Vue 2 is now end of life, and for the majority of the project is probably fine. It really depends if it's still, of course, ongoing, running. I
think that's the big difference, right? It's like if you're running a SaaS or you're running a startup app or something, you want to keep it up to date and on the latest and greatest, because every improvement in the framework is an improvement for your end users. So it's worth doing. But if you're in an agency life where you're building, you know, let's say primarily static websites or primarily static plus static with a form websites, then it's like, do you really care? Probably not. It'll work just fine. So yeah, you probably won't. But that is where it gets a little tricky with when you're dealing with, you know, server side stuff or databases. You know, in my world now, that it's like, okay, even if you have your website that you delivered a year ago, if now there is a security patch in Directus itself that you're using to power that website, you should still update the backend, right? Because you have a live server and a database and customer information flowing in and out, and like somebody has to own that dependency and keep it alive. Yeah, for sure. That is part of the work. And back in the day, I mean, again, guilty as charged in the WordPress days, we never ever did that. Because it's just like, it works, it's fine. Oh, there's a WordPress security problem? It's such a small website, what are the odds? And then some automated bot does it anyways, and it's like, oh, whoops, well, it's reverted back up on with your life. It's kind of surreal, but it is how it works at a lot of places, unfortunately.
It still does, yeah, I guess so too. Yeah. But luckily not in our places, neither at Directus itself, nor, we all have our own companies, so to say. So
yeah, very true. No, it's like I strive for it, and I want to make sure that, you know, within now that Directus is more of a business than just a project as well. I want to make sure that we keep that top of mind, right? That it keeps security patches are critical. They are always top of the to-do list, and it's like dependency updates. You know, we use Renovate Bot to automate a lot of the patches, and we have some test suites to make sure that is automated. You know, we push out patch releases roughly every 2 weeks or so for people that want to follow along. So it's like very important, but that takes a bit of, you know, whoever's in charge of the roadmaps and decision making has to find that important, and that is just not a universal truth.
Absolutely,
more often than not. Yeah,
right. I think that's a good moment. We've been in for more than almost 1.5 hours here.
Oh, jeez.
And we have, we can fill probably 2-3 more episodes with everything mentioned.
Yeah, we didn't even talk about open source funding or anything like that. So I think we've got a couple other episodes.
We heard Directus was a source available project, so we'll come to that another time, because
very good.
We can easily add another 90 minutes to that. Rijk, it was a pleasure to have you on the DejaVue podcast. So we have one last question. Where can people follow you and Directus?
You can follow me ideally on Blue Sky nowadays.
Yes.
I am one of the folks that switched camps. It is 2013 Twitter, and I'm all about it on Rijk.nyc. There will also be a personal website for the first time in a decade under that same address. So that'll be exciting. It'll be a good place. Otherwise, on GitHub at my full name, Rijk van Zanten, and just Directus all over the internet. We have accounts on every single platform you're on. So find us wherever you are.
Sweet. Of course, all the links as usual in the show notes / description, so we don't have to like type it while hearing that, going back. I mean, you can if you feel like. Yeah, like thank you so much for being with us here and sharing not only your journey, all your experience, and of course also all hot takes.
That's what I love doing. Thank you for having me.
Yes.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. And for everyone else, if this is not the latest Stage episode, jump straight to the next one. That's in queue. Otherwise, go back to the old ones. We've linked a few also in the show notes as usual. It could be interesting. And if you offer it, then congrats. Leave us a comment, and we'll get you a cookie at the next conference, I guess. Talking about conferences, though, that's very important. The Vue.js Amsterdam conference is coming up soon, and we have a little 10% discount code for everybody interested. Rijk was a speaker before. I've been there a couple of times, and I hope Michael will be there next year in the 2025 edition. So I hope all of you will be there, actually. I mean, like you're from Amsterdam, living in New York now, so it would be a great excuse to come around.
If they'll have me, I'll be right back.
Sweet. So I hope we will see all of you there, and you will see all of us there. And we'll see you in the latest or the older episodes. So thanks for tuning in, and see you in the next one. Bye, folks.